Hi, welcome to Voices. I am your host, Keith Major. Today I have as a very special guest Pastor James Nix, who is the director of the Ellen G. White Estate, and of course our very own Pastor Lynden Williams, who is the coordinator of the Spirit of Prophecy for the South Bahamas Conference. Gentlemen, welcome to.
Thank you.
Pastor Nix, what brings you to this union at this time, or to the Bahamas at this time?
What brings me here, frankly, is an invitation to speak at the camp meeting.
Okay.
That's why I'm here.
Yes, and tell us a little bit about who James Nix is. What do you do, and who is James Nix?
Who is James Nix?
Yes.
Well, I'm the husband of one wife. I guess that's pretty kosher. And the father of one daughter and one grandson. But as far as what I do is I work at the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I direct the Ellen G. White Estate. And the Ellen G. White Estate, for people who may not know, is the organization that Ellen White set up in her last will and testament. She actually specified that she was leaving her literary materials, her letters, her manuscripts, copyrights to her books, those kind of things, a committee of 5 individuals that she named. And she doesn't use the word in perpetuity, but if there's a vacancy, the remaining 4 were to elect a new trustee. That number's actually been increased now to 15 trustees. But we're still on a self-perpetuating basis. If there's a vacancy, the other trustees elect the new trustee to replace the one that's either died or moved away or whatever happened. So is pretty much answering questions about Ellen White, trying to find ways to promote her ministry, her life among Seventh-day Adventists and others, but primarily among church members. We work on compilations of books. We have research centers established in all of the world divisions of the church. So there's that kind of coordination that goes on to make certain they have new materials that come out about Ellen White or questions that they may not have answers to. They refer to the main office. They'll come to one of the staff to work with, trying to find an answer. We have researchers that come and they're doing doctoral researchers. Sometimes it's just people that want to know members and just want to know something about Ellen White. So it's a very busy office, but one that we feel very privileged to be able to work in.
But what does one have to do to qualify for a trustee? I mean, what are the kinds of people that become trustees? Conference presidents or what?
Kind of set the pattern. She named the people, not by position, but by name. But we've kind of looked at the positions and kind of go the same direction.
Okay.
So she named to the 5 original trustees, included A.G. Daniels, Pastor Daniels, who was the president of the General Conference at the time, and F.M. Wilcox, who was editor of the church paper, The Review, C.H. Jones, who was the manager of the Pacific Press, or we'd say president of the Pacific Press today, and then 2 of hers. Clarence Chrysler, who had worked for her for several years, and then her son, who was, I guess he wasn't technically a secretary, but he kind of oversaw the office, the operation of the office, the last years of Ellen White's life. So we've kind of done the same thing. We currently have on our board the president of the General Conference. We have the editor of the Adventist World / Adventist Review. We have several secretaries. We call them department directors now. Several of those. We do have one layperson, a businessman on our board. But it's not a large board, as I say, it's 15. But it represents the interests of the church.
Okay, yes. Pastor Williams, you are the coordinator of the Spirit of Prophecy here in the South Bahamas Conference. Is your job pretty much a similar thing, promoting Ellen White, or how is that?
Most of my work I've found recently has been in educating, explaining people how to interpret or understand the writings of Mistress White and the contribution that she has made to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm presently doing that in moving around the various churches as opportunity provides.
Okay. What or who is the Spirit of Prophecy?
Well, it's a technical term
Yes.
that could mean, for a theologian, the Holy Spirit or other prophets. Technically, it's not limited to Ellen White. But as far as in our business, what we're usually referring to when we speak of the Spirit of Prophecy, we're generally talking about the writings of Ellen White.
Ellen White.
And that's a term that goes back, she even uses it herself. But I know the theologians out there have it reconfigured a little more precisely. But when we're talking about the Spirit of Prophecy, we're really talking about the writings of Ellen White That could be published writings, or the so-called unpublished writings that are still waiting to be made available.
Yeah.
They're available for researchers.
Yes.
They are not yet available online, but they will be in 2015.
Okay.
Our board has voted to make available for free everything that we have. That would be her correspondence,
Yes.
everything that we have, as well as incoming letters, the letters from her sons,
Okay.
Willie White, Edson White, James White. All that is going to be made available in 2015, with the 100th anniversary of her death.
Of a death, yes.
So
What-
we're gearing up and working hard, trying to get all this scanned and digitized so we can
Yeah,
make it available.
yeah. Pastor Williams, maybe you want to take a stab at this. Why is Ellen White so important to the church? And I'll come back to you with that question as well. You're doing all of this stuff, getting all this stuff out for free and all of this. Why is she so important to the end time church?
Without the ministry of Ellen White, the Adventist church would not be what it is today. One example. In a vision, she saw the need to start printing a paper. And because of that, we now have some of her works in over 50 languages. Her little book, Steps to Christ, I think has been translated in over 100 languages. And
Right over 150.
okay,
150,
150.
yeah.
And she has helped to shape the growth and the, to some degree, she has influenced the direction of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is taken today. And we are one, not the fastest growing denomination
Right.
within Christendom.
Yes. Does that create a problem of our members raising her writings above the Bible?
Well, let me just finish
Go ahead.
back on his a little bit before we go to this other. As far as Ellen White and her importance to the church, we need to make it very clear to anybody that's listening that basic to this church, where our doctrines come from, is the Bible.
Yes.
It is not Ellen White.
Okay.
But as Ellen White, God through Ellen White is a better way of putting it as far as I'm concerned, has given direction to this church in terms of a lot of areas of emphasis that otherwise we would probably not have. We would not have over 60 publishing houses if it had not been for the vision to start publishing. We would not have health institutions all around the world if God hadn't given her the vision in 1865 that we should start one sanitarium and it explodes. We would not have a lot of the other things that we do, our education. I mean, when you think about a woman who had, well, we don't know exactly how many years of formal education she had, but we know it ended at age 9.
Right.
Normally we say 3, but they did start kids a little younger than that in Portland, Maine, so it may have been 4 or 5. But whatever it was, to have the largest Protestant parochial school system in the world, because of her nurturing and her promotion, it's phenomenal. I mean, much of what we do, and then take the emphasis why we do all these things, not just because of the visions, but because of the Great Controversy vision. And our understanding that God is inviting us as a people now, even to help make right the wrongs that were caused by sin originally. That gives a whole new opening dimension for Seventh-day Adventists, why we do ADRA, why we do a lot of things for people that normally you wouldn't think a church our size would necessarily involve itself in. Certainly not the many things that it's suggesting. A church our size would not normally be doing that.
Great. And really beautiful. So then why, Pastor Williams, are so many people not pro Ellen White? There are some people in our church who says, let's look at the Bible, not Ellen. There's not as positive a flow amongst the masses as we would like to see. Or maybe, have you found that?
Yes.
And what are we doing about that?
And a large part of it is because of what I call the abuse of Ellen White. Persons will use her writing sometimes as a whip to try and force individuals to take a particular course of action. And I think that stems largely from an individual not being able to properly understand and interpret the writings of an author inspired by the Holy Spirit. So the same abuse that persons use scripture where they take it out of its context, they're now doing with Ellen White. And so sometimes I think we're seeing a backlash against it, where you're trying to force someone to do something and they just simply resist. And as a result of that, she has fallen out of favor with some members. I see it as my job to help them correct that, where they see as the woman that she was, someone who believed in God, someone who worshiped, but yet she was also a human being, and she was a well-balanced. I'm discovering more and more as I read and study that this was not a woman who was an extremist. She was someone who used good common sense and who realized that you had to adjust based on the situation that you find yourself, as long as you stuck with the overall principle.
Pastor Nix, and you can add on any point that comes up. My experience was about 10 years ago. I really got into Ellen White and her history and her biography through, I think, of Arthur White, who really brought this down home thing. And I saw a whole lot of stuff, like when her husband died, how she had to come out of her hospital bed for the funeral and speak for 10 minutes, and the fact that she had 5 secretaries, one of whom her job was to compile the writings in book form and that sort of stuff. Tell us about Ellen White, the biography, that would encourage people to want to get to know her and read her books and that sort of a thing.
Do you have an hour? Now, what kind of a person
Yeah.
was she? As I was mentioning to you before the interview began, when I was in school, longer ago than I want to admit, but when I was in school, there were still people alive in California where I was who knew Ellen White. So I took the opportunity to visit with some of them. And the talking with people who remembered her, and that's in addition to what you read in her writings or what people have written through the years, but just actually sit down with somebody. It was usually 1 or 2 were men, but basically they were elderly women. And said, what kind of person was she? And what you found from, I mean, all of them, she was warm, she had a good sense of humor. People, as one of them said, she wasn't giggly or anything like that, but if something funny happened, she could laugh just as much as anybody else about things. She had a house that was inviting. People loved to come. In fact, one of her letters in Australia, she said she had so much company, she thought she was just going to nail a sign on the front door saying free lodging, because people would come and stay and stay and stay. Why not? She was a gracious hostess. She didn't charge you anything for staying. So why not come? I mean, but people now think that she was some kind of a domineering person, that she would not want to be around at all. That's not the picture that comes across. Now the problem is, as I see it, part of the problem is that when you read some of the testimonies, they are dealing with very severe situations, and they come across strong. None of us living today have the opportunity to have known the person who wrote those testimonies.
Okay.
So on occasion when you find her writing to someone, some strong counsel that God has given her a message for that person, you'll also find her saying that tears are falling on the paper as I'm writing this to you.
Oh, wow.
Because she herself knew she had messages
Yes.
that God gave for her. And certainly her husband. I mean, can you be married to a prophet?
Yes.
I mean, James White was no milquetoast, as we say. He was a strong man.
Right.
And yet, so she knew what it was for the reaction of her husband. She knew how difficult it was for some people to process this. If I had time, I could tell you a story even about her granddaughter. It's the only person that I talked to. Of course, I was talking to people 50 years after
Right.
White's death, but the only one that I talked to who actually had a message that God had given Ellen White for this
Right.
was the oldest granddaughter.
Well, give us that story, because
But
it's
her-
motivating to me.
Her initial response, well, in essence, the story is that this was while they were starting Avondale College in Australia. And they were a lot of company, but there was no motels, no hotels. So if parents wanted to come and find out whether they wanted to send their kids there to school, they had to stay with in the homes of one of the faculty members. And this was the oldest granddaughter, White Robinson. Ella said to me that it seemed like if people couldn't get into Grandma's house, they all wanted to come to our house, which was Ellen White's son, W.C. White. That was Ella's father. And so that meant extra work, all this kind of things. And she said that she started praying to the Lord to impress her new mother. Her real mother had died, and her father had remarried, so it would be her stepmother. But to impress her mother, not to ask her to do so much work. Now, that's a typical prayer that 14,
Yes.
15 might pray. Well, she said shortly after this, her grandmother came across the road, like she did most mornings when she wasn't traveling, and the family would all gather in the parlor, and they would visit for a little while. And then her grandmother, Ellen White, would go back and do her work back at her own home. So this morning was typical. She said Grandma was there, we were all talking, Usually at a certain point in the conversation, Ella said, my younger sister Mabel and I knew that we took our two twin brothers who had just been born, little babies, into the other, so Mom and Papa could visit a little more with Grandma. And Grandma said, no, not this morning. I have a message. So, abbreviating the story, she said her grandmother reached in her satchel, or we might say purse today, pulled out a manuscript and began to read. And Ella said, I realized this is different. This is not a normal visit from grandmother.
Okay.
So they begin to read. I mean, she begins to read. And the first part was counsel for Ella's father. No problem, Ella said. That wasn't for me, that was for my father.
Right,
My dad.
right.
Fine, whatever. And then I kept reading, she said. And so the next was for my new mother. No problem, wasn't for me. Then she said, Grandma kept going. And she started giving some counsel to me. And what was the counsel to Ella? Well, the counsel was that your mother is so busy and has so much to do and so much hard work with all the company and everything, you should do more to help your mother. Now she's praying what? The opposite.
Yeah.
I'm already impressed by mother not to ask me to do something. So you should do more. And so she said, kept telling about how important it is, no matter how insignificant it seems, everything we should do to the very best of our ability. That's what God wants us, on and on. She said, I was getting there so angry. It just was really making me angry. The grandmother was saying, and finally she said, I blurted out, Grandma, did you make that up or did the angel really tell you all that? And she said, my grandmother responded, I didn't put anything in but what the angel told me.
Wow.
And then there was some apparently to Ella's younger sister, what she said to me, my sister. I said, I don't know. She said, all I could do was just wait for grandmother to leave. Just get out of it. I was so angry.
Yeah.
It seemed so unfair. This was exactly the opposite of what I'd been praying for.
Yes.
She said, as soon as Grandma left, I ran to my bedroom, threw myself across my bed, and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And she said, as I was there crying, all of a sudden it dawned on me, this was the answer to my prayer. Not the answer I wanted, the
Yes.
answer to my prayer.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then she said, such came over to me.
Wow.
To think that the Creator, the God of the universe,
Yes.
took time to send an angel messenger down to my grandmother
Right.
to give me this. She said, Jim, I'm embarrassed to admit that was not my first reaction.
Wow.
My
And-
first reaction was anger.
Yes.
The point I wanted to make with that story is that you didn't talk to Ella very long without realizing that she was thoroughly in love with her grandmother. She was
Okay.
33 when her grandmother died, so
Right.
she had lots of memories.
Yes.
And she really loved her grandmother, and yet when it came across what she wanted to do,
Yes.
what was her first reaction? It's unfair, it's angry.
Yes.
God's not right, it's not fair.
Right.
Did the angel really tell you that, or did you just did you just make that up, or did the angel
Yeah.
really tell you that? And it's helped me kind of keep in perspective.
Yes.
Because I never met Ellen White.
Right.
There's no one living today that remembers Ellen White. We
right,
buried
right.
the last person a year or two, about 2 years.
Okay.
So there's no one left alive that you can even go talk to
Yeah.
for a first-hand record.
All right. And a beautiful story, wonderful lady. But as you read her biography, as per Arthur White, you find that she had a lot of pain. She lost a young child to death, almost lost another one, lost her husband, who had, I think, 3 strokes maybe. He was debilitated. They had pneumonia. They traveled in the cold. She broke her going up into Colorado. She had all of these problems. You would think that everything went well. Pastor Williams, tell us, what does that mean?
Like I said, she was a woman like everyone else
Mhm.
who had her struggles, her challenges. It was when Cindy Tush was here last year, I think it was, who made mention that she had a little challenge with her weight. The things that really shows me her humaneness.
Mhm.
I was reading something where she had been to a family to help take care of them who were abusing the health message, I call it, because they had wasted away. They did not take care of themselves, went to an extreme. And she said they were so small that it took 2 of them to make a shadow. And that showed me. And I remember another time when they talked about how she said she used to bring her son on the pulpit as a baby. He says, what you call it? The
Rocker.
Right.
rocker with her feet.
Yes.
Cradle.
Yes, but now he is much older. He was sitting down and he was sleeping while she was speaking, and he was an adult at this point.
Mhm.
And so that shows me that this is not the harsh, stern, iron lady, inflexible person
right.
that she's sometimes portrayed as.
Yes, yes,
She's
yes.
a regular human being who
That's
had
right.
feelings, who had emotions,
Yeah.
who went through the same things. And James White wrote in 1868
Mhm.
that the challenge his wife faced was that when she spoke, to the toddy to get them moving, she spoke strongly. But those who were the extremists, they grabbed a hold of that, and then she had to speak to them. And then the toddy picked up on, and so it was like just sort of a back and forth situation.
Yeah.
How do you balance
Yes.
this whole thing out?
Yes, yes, yes. Pastor Nix, and you know, we could go on and on and on
Yeah.
about the biography, but there
Let
was
me just add
this,
one
go
more
ahead.
thing there.
Mhm.
Talking about her as a human. I was talking one time with Ellen White's youngest granddaughter, Grace Jacques, and she was only 15 when her grandmother died, so she didn't have quite as many memories.
Mhm.
But she said, I only remember seeing my grandmother agitated once.
Wow.
And she said, on that particular day, grandmother was wringing her hands and said to Grace's mother, which would be, of course, Ellen White's daughter-in-law, May, if we'd owned then what we know now, we could have saved Henry. Henry was her firstborn that died
Yes,
of pneumonia at
that's
the age
right.
of 16.
Mhm.
And here is a mother, 50 years after the, I don't know exactly what year this happened, but about
Mhm.
50 years after the death of her firstborn.
Mhm.
Still like any mother, any parent,
Mhm.
still grieving the loss
Mhm.
of her child.
Mhm.
Talk about human, yeah.
Mhm.
She could
Mhm.
feel what other people feel.
Mhm. Mhm. One of the things that I recall in reading this biography too was the prediction of the Civil War. They thought it was going to be short, and in her vision or prayer, she saw some longer term stuff, you know. But we could get into that. That's going to take up a lot of time. That just came to me. But
Okay.
the point I want to ask you is, because I want to get to her writings very quickly. Time is fastly going. What's your favorite Ellen White book, Pastor Nix, and why?
I don't know, I like a lot of books. I can tell you
Mhm.
chapters. I would rather go to chapters.
Okay.
In Desire of Ages are two chapters that
Yes.
move me like nothing else I've read
Yes.
anywhere.
Go ahead.
And that's Gethsemane
Yes.
and Calvary.
You're going to think I'm kidding, but they are two of my favorite chapters too.
I
But tell us
cannot
why.
read those two
Mm-hmm.
without finding myself drawn into the story.
Uh-huh.
It's not like I'm just a passive observer. I mean, I just feel like asking me to come pray
Mm-hmm.
with him there in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's saying, Father,
Mhm.
forgive Jim when
Yeah.
he doesn't even know what he's doing when
Right.
they're pounding the nails in his ass. I mean, she has a way
Yes.
of pulling you into the
Mhm.
story
Yes.
and making it so real
Uh-huh.
that you feel like you're right there. You're not just, as I say,
Yes.
an innocent observer
Mhm.
or passive observers.
Yes. Desire of Ages is my favorite book. I've heard, I think it was C.D. Brooks say that Billy Graham and his preaching, you can hear Desire of Ages through and through. Pastor Williams, what's your favorite book and why?
I like those two chapters, and whenever I preach on the sacrifice of Christ, I tend to emphasize his mental struggles.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps one of the earliest ones that I read was Steps to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And when she talks about God's love for man, that
Mhm.
did sound me,
Mm-hmm.
and the sinner's need of Christ. That was
Mhm.
perhaps one of the first books that I read
Mhm.
way back in the early 80s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it tugged at my heart to know, hey, I'm loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that had a part to play in just sort of high school in the mid-80s. I remember one day I was working on the construction site, I'm an electrician by trade.
Mm-hmm.
I was working outside, and the sun sort of went behind a cloud. There was a cloud light.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking that cloud was there for one reason,
Mm-hmm.
so God could look down and smile at me without
Mhm.
me seeing him.
Uh-huh.
And that was powerful, and I think that came really from that chapter in Steps of Christ
Yes.
about how much of God's great love for
Yes.
us.
Yes.
That had a very strong impact
Impact.
in my early life
Life,
as a Christian.
Yeah, you know the book Steps to Christ. We had a guy coming to our church, and he wasn't baptized, but he had been coming. And one, I gave him that book. And the next week, he said to me, boy, that's a sweet book. I said, yeah. End of story, in about 6 months, he was baptized. I'm not sure that was it.
But it didn't hurt.
It didn't hurt.
No.
Okay.
had to be pleasant.
Yeah. Question for you, Pastor Nix. Book of the year. Every year there's a book of the year. Is it the Ellen G. White estate that chooses this?
No.
Oh,
I'm not sure who chooses it in your division,
okay.
because different divisions use different books.
Ah.
So it's not even uniform across the denomination.
Okay, okay.
In the North American division where I live,
Mhm.
why one year it's a Review and Herald book, and the
Mhm.
next year it's a Pacific Press book.
Okay.
And the two publishing houses pick which one they want to have for the book of the year.
Right.
But I don't know what it is here.
Is that why they're deciding to merge you?
Oh, now you're
To merge?
really-
That's another thing, huh?
That's another topic, another discussion, in a higher pay grade
Yeah.
than I'm at.
Yes. Our book is Mission to the Cities, I think, this year. Is that? Is that a new compilation
Right.
that the estate did? How, I'll come back to you, Pastor Williams. How does that happen with in terms of you compiling these new books from the white
Well,
estate
what you try to
perspective?
do, and briefly, what you try to do is let Ellen White still have the emphasis for what she wants to say.
Okay.
So you try to find the various topics, whatever the big topic, you try to figure out the various subjects that she's discussing under that big umbrella, and then find those quotations, and then look at the best ones, if you're not gonna be comprehensive, like this little book. She says a lot about evangelism of the cities, or ministry of the cities, that is not in that book. So what we try to do is find the choices, and if she's saying the same thing in different words but the same thought, we don't, we don't put every single one in there. But you basically want Ellen White to still be Ellen White. Emphasis, if she doesn't say anything, or very little on it, that's a short chapter compared, well, if she says nothing, there's no chapter, but
Right.
if she doesn't say much, you're not gonna have a very long chapter. If she says more, the chapters are a little longer. But we try to let Ellen White still be the author.
Yes. I have 2 minutes left. I'm going to give you one. I'm going to give you one. Pastor Williams, tell me, what would you say to people to encourage them to read more Ellen White's books? What would you say?
I would say read it, and read it with an anticipation that there is something there that will benefit you, and something that will help you in your walk with the Lord. Those are the two things I would emphasize. It will help you in your walk with Christ, and there's something there that is good, is wholesome, will benefit you. I must add, however, do not take a molehill and turn it into 10. By that I mean, I guess I am maybe a little more defensive, apologetic, because of what I've encountered in the
Yes,
Bahamas.
I've seen it too.
And that
Yes.
is, do not take one statement
Yeah.
and turn it into a doctrine.
Gotcha.
We've had a lot of problems with it, and it's still ongoing. So I would ask persons to try and be open-minded about
Yes.
the situation.
Yes. I have to cut you off. So what I find in Ellen White's books, there's always scriptural references in a lot of her books to what she's saying. So you can tie it in with that. Pastor Nix, our time is fleeting. What would you say to us?
I would say amen to everything he said. I would say approach it with an open mind, realizing that not everything that you find discussed in there applies to you. Some people try to force things and get guilty, go on guilt trips about things that's not their problem. So she's dealing with a whole range of problems. Approach it with an open mind. Ask the Lord, help me find the things that will help me on my walk to the holy city. Help me in my Christian experience here on earth as I'm living and interacting with other people. Help me to be a better person, and it will happen.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We could go on and on and on. It's just enjoyable. I would encourage you to read Arthur White's description. It's already in our local South Bahamas. Arthur White's description of Ellen White's early years, and it'll encourage you to read others of her books. My guests have been Pastor Nix of the Ellen G. White Estates and Pastor Lynden Williams. Gentlemen, it's been fine having you on the program.
Thank you.
Until next time.